My name is Clara. I'm 39 years old and work as a psychologist in Minneapolis. This year, I showed up at my brother's doorstep on Thanksgiving, carrying a homemade pumpkin pie. Less than 20 minutes later, right in the middle of dinner, my sister-in-law stood, raised her glass, smiled, and said clearly, "We've agreed." Clara is no longer part of this family. The whole table applauded. My stepmother nodded. My brother looked down at his plate. No one said a word. No one defended me. Have you ever been pushed out of your own family's story as if you were just a guest who stayed too long? If that sounds familiar, leave a comment below. Hit like if you've ever been hurt by the people you were supposed to be safest with. And don't forget to subscribe, because what happened after that was far crueler than their words. I used to believe that if I was kind enough, patient enough, willing enough to sacrifice, then love would eventually come back around. But after all these years, the only thing I received in return was silence, and eventually the kind of contempt people disguise as being honest. I still remember when I was 32, had just finished my doctorate and was planning to buy a small condo near the hospital where I worked. Then Janice, my stepmother, called me during a shift, voice frantic. The doctor suspects pancreatic cancer. They need to schedule a biopsy immediately. I don't have insurance. I canceled my meeting with the realtor, emptied my entire first ever savings account to cover tests, procedures, medication, even a round of preventive treatment, not covered by insurance. 3 months later, at a birthday party, I overheard Valerie whispering to a friend. It wasn't anything serious, just some stomach issues, but Janice said, let Clara cover it all. She doesn't use her money for anything anyway. I stood in that restroom for a long time that night, washing my hands in cold water until my fingernails turned blue. It wasn't the money. It was the realization that, to them, kindness wasn't something to value. It was something to exploit for as long as they could. When Kevin, my brother, got caught in a tax fraud case at the family logistics company, Valerie called me at 6 a.m. I know you're busy, but only you can help him. If Kevin gets arrested, Mom won't survive it. I was the one who scheduled the attorney meeting, paid the initial retainer, over $8,000, and sat for 4 hours outside the courthouse just to hear Kevin say one sentence. You didn't need to go overboard. It was just a paperwork mix-up. I smiled, lowered my head, didn't argue. Back then, I still believed that if I swallowed enough resentment, things might hurt less. I didn't realize that silence would become the invisible agreement that gave them permission to walk all over me. The year Abby, Valerie's daughter, lost her college scholarship, Valerie called again. This is hard to ask, but can you help with some of the tuition? We can't afford the first semester up front. You're single and stable. I agreed without hesitation, even though it meant turning down my dream house for the second time because the budget just wouldn't stretch. After the money transfer, Valerie sent exactly one line. Thanks. No call, no dinner, no acknowledgement. But a month later, I saw pictures of their family vacation in Miami posted on Facebook, standing in front of a 5-star resort with the caption, "Family above all." When I attended Abby's birthday, I gave her a classic novel I'd loved as a child, Little Women. Abby smiled politely. Valerie glanced at the gift, then smirked. Oh, no one gives real gifts anymore? Well, Clara always has her own way. I remember sitting still, lips stiff. The guests gave awkward chuckles and changed the subject. Every time something like that happened, I felt like a social worker, invited to a house that wasn't mine. Only called in to fix problems, never meant to stay in the room once they were solved. People used to call me the backbone of the family, but no one ever asked if that spine was tired, if it could still carry a whole structure full of people unwilling to stand on their own. Janice once said plainly during Christmas dinner, Clara's the most successful in the family. She doesn't have a husband or kids, so it's only natural she helps out. I was mid-scoop with the Brussels sprouts when my hand froze in midair. No one objected. No one saw anything wrong with that sentence. That's how I lived, for years. Like a pillar, always upright, always strong, always still, just so others could lean on me. But no one noticed the cracks beneath the surface, how deeply I was crumbling under the weight of their expectations, their demands, and their quiet disregard. I started waking up at night, drenched in cold sweat, chest tight with a pressure I couldn't name. I thought I was sick, but no. It was my body finally refusing to carry what my heart had been suppressing for too long. Still, I kept showing up. I kept answering their calls for help. I kept doing everything for family. Until that Thanksgiving, when they made it official, I was out. I wasn't shocked that they cut me off. I was stunned to realize I had never truly been welcomed. I was just the name they used to fill in the blanks when they didn't want to take responsibility. But what they didn't know was I didn't come empty-handed that day. The room fell silent, as if all the air had been pulled out the moment the thick folder hit the wood table. They sat there under warm amber light beneath a chandelier I helped pay for last year, a joint housewarming gift that I alone transferred money for. Valerie froze, her face paling in seconds, though she still tried to act like I'd just placed a menu down in front of her. I said nothing else. I didn't need to. Everything I wanted to say was already printed in that folder. Internal company memos, bank transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands, financial breakdowns reviewed by an accountant friend. It was a file I'd been compiling quietly for over 8 months, since another manipulative phone call from Valerie pushed me one step too far. Valerie shot up from her seat, chair scraping harshly against the wood floor. She lunged for the folder, but my hand was quicker. I pulled it back, looked up, and met her eyes. "Sit down," I said softly, but my voice didn't need volume. It cut sharper than anything else in that room. Valerie froze. She glanced around, searching for backup. Janice kept slicing her turkey, though her hands trembled. Kevin stared at his half-empty wine glass, not meeting anyone's gaze. Only Abby had the courage to speak. "Mom," she whispered, voice fragile, like the smallest nudge could shatter her. "Is it true? You knew about this? And you made Dad stay quiet?" No one answered. Valerie looked at her daughter, lips pressed tightly. I saw Abby's shoulders tense, and I wondered, had anyone ever told her the truth? Had anyone seen her as a person with a right to know, instead of a piece on the board to be moved? I turned the folder slightly so it faced Kevin. "Would you like to read it first?" I asked. He didn't lift his head. I noticed his fists clenched under the table, knuckles white. "I'm not here to issue ultimatums," I said evenly. "But if you've decided I'm no longer family, then don't expect me to keep family secrets." Janice finally spoke. "You don't understand what you're doing, Clara. This is family." "Family?" I let out a quiet, hollow laugh. "You call this family? The same one that voted someone out over dinner and applauded like it was a game?" Janice flushed, setting down her silverware. "We just thought you needed a break. You seemed sensitive lately." "No," I said. "I'm not too sensitive. I'm just too used to being exploited and pretending it's normal." Evan suddenly stood, walked around the table, and took the folder. He flipped through it slowly, not skipping a single page. Every time he paused, I could see the tightness in his throat. Abby kept her eyes on her mother. "How long have you been hiding this from me?" she asked. Valerie didn't respond. Her silence was louder than any answer. I didn't want to turn the evening into a courtroom. I just wanted them to see the consequences. Consequences of every choice, every word, every knife in the back they thought I'd never fight back against. Kevin finally looked up, not at me, but directly at Valerie. "I trusted you," he said hoarsely. "I did what you said because I thought it was for the family. You said we just had to get through the rough patch." Valerie stepped forward, her voice dropping into something almost pleading. "Kevin, I did it to protect you. If your company gets investigated, then—" "Then what?" Kevin cut her off. "Then what, Valerie? Did you think Clara would stay silent forever?" I quietly took a step back, as if I were no longer part of the scene unfolding before me. What I felt wasn't triumph, nor relief. It was release. like a tightly sealed door had finally been thrown open, letting the rot inside spill out on its own. Abby moved back, away from her mother, and turned to me. Her eyes were red, but behind the tears was something else. Trust. For the first time in years, she didn't shy away from looking at me. I picked up the glass of water from the table, not to drink, but to keep my hands from shaking. "Anyone else have something to say?" I asked. No one answered. Only the crackle of the fireplace and the merciless ticking of the wall clock. I set the glass down and looked around one last time. "Then I'm leaving, but not as a failure. I leave as the last one who dared to speak the truth." I walked toward the door, not in haste. Every step echoed on the wooden floor like a knock on the shattered remnants of trust. Just as I reached for my coat, Valerie shouted from behind, "Who do you think you are? You think you're so righteous? You're tearing this family apart." I turned, my eyes no longer angry, just unusually calm. "This family tore itself apart," I said. "I just refused to be the one pulling out the last brick." And I opened the door and stepped out, leaving behind a warm house lit by golden lights, yet so cold no one could stand to stay long inside the truth they'd buried. By the time I returned to my apartment, night had fallen completely. The first snow of the season was falling softly, dusting the balcony in a thin, powdery layer. The street lamps cast a pale yellow glow through the frosted windows, scattering light across the wooden floor, making the room feel both familiar and strangely distant. My phone vibrated non-stop in my coat pocket. I took it out and stared at the screen lighting up with missed calls. From Kevin, from my stepmother, and from several unknown numbers I assumed were Valerie or her friends using alternate phones to dodge being blocked. The texts piled up, some filled with rage, others pretending to be gentle, sprinkled between desperate emojis, trying to salvage something they had long since trampled. I didn't open any of them, not tonight. I took off my coat, hung it on the hook, and sat in the armchair by the window. A draft slipped through the glass, making me shiver slightly. I wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, eyes fixed on the street below, where headlights drifted by like restless specks of light without a clear destination. Suddenly, a memory surged back without warning, as they often did. It was 2014. I had just received my certification as a licensed therapist, not even 3 weeks after Dad passed away. The house in Stillwater where I grew up had been rekeyed, no warning. Valerie answered the door when I arrived, still holding her coffee mug, eyes indifferent like I was a delivery person at the wrong address. "Clara? Oh, I didn't know you were coming." She stepped back slightly but didn't invite me in. Behind her, I saw my stepmother sitting on the couch, staring out the window, as if she had no idea I was even there. "I just want to pick up a few of Dad's things," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "He said he was leaving some things for me. Photo albums, the antique clock." Valerie shrugged. "The will. It's not very specific. The lawyer's handling it. But to avoid drama, maybe you should wait." "Drama?" I frowned. She didn't answer right away. She just looked at me, then said in a gentle, almost noble tone, "We need this house. Kevin has a family. Mom's health isn't great. You don't really have anything to lose, right?" I remember exactly how she said "you," soft but drenched in false pity, like I was a forgotten suitcase left on a bus, unclaimed and unmissed, and leaving me behind was just common sense. I walked away that day empty-handed, with a fresh scrape on my heart. Since then, I never stepped foot in that house again. But whenever something came up, Kevin needed a co-signer for a car loan, Valerie was flagged for a tax audit, or my stepmother had to be rushed to the hospital for a possible heart attack, they always came to me, and I, foolish or hopeful, kept helping. Because I used to believe that if I didn't abandon them, eventually, they wouldn't abandon me. I stood, pulled out an old leather notebook from a drawer, one I kept for personal notes. I flipped to the first page and began thumbing through. Some entries were brief, covered Mom's hospital bills, $4,730. Others were longer. Paid Abby's fall semester tuition, $2,800. Promised to pay back within the year, never mentioned again. I flipped to the middle, where I had once written a single sentence after a quiet night in the ER when Kevin asked me to sign a medical release form because Valerie didn't show up. I'm the one chosen when no one else wants to step up. Picked up a pen and added a new line. Is this family or just another transaction? It wasn't a question that needed an immediate answer, but writing it down helped me confirm that every emotion I had ever felt, hurt, doubt, anger, had roots. They weren't imagined. Back then, whenever someone insulted me, I would ask myself, am I overreacting? But now, with every memory clear and every detail time-stamped, I no longer question myself. I opened my laptop and created a new folder, Truth. I began uploading documents, receipts, texts, emails, voice recordings of phone calls I'd quietly sought advice on. I organized them into categories: finance, family, legal, emotional, abuse. With each title I typed, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of the voice they'd tried to strip from me. Outside, the snow kept falling. My phone buzzed again. It was Kevin. I didn't answer, but I read his message. What are you trying to get out of this? Every family has issues. Do you really have to blow it all up? I set the phone down and gripped the edge of the table. My heart wasn't racing. I wasn't angry. What I felt was steady and unmistakable. I had come too far to go back to being the silent anchor holding up their illusions. I wrote one last line in the notebook. They don't want understanding. They want my silence. My father died on a September morning, the sky unusually clear. I still remember the sunlight spilling through the ICU window, slanting across the thin hands I used to hold so tightly in his final days. He passed from a sudden stroke, quiet and swift. Just 3 days earlier, I had video called him to share a breakthrough I had with a patient battling severe depression. He chuckled softly, squinting into the dim light. If anything ever happens, you're the only one I trust. I clung to those words like a last rite, but I never imagined that the moment he closed his eyes would be the same moment. Every bit of that trust vanished, like smoke. After the funeral, I asked if I could keep a few of my father's belongings: the pocket watch he wore every holiday, a few notebooks filled with his slanted handwriting, and the handwritten will he once told me I'd be the first to read. But my stepmother, Janice, replied curtly, "Everything's been rearranged. My attorney has taken care of it." I had my doubts, but said nothing. People were still wearing mourning bands, white lilies still sat on the altar, and I didn't want to disrupt the atmosphere of grief with a fight over property. I told myself, after the 40-day memorial, I'd get clarity. But by the time I started digging, it was already too late. My father's bank account had been transferred to a new owner just a week after he passed. The account information had been changed, and the deed to the house was updated immediately following the funeral, while I was still staying at a nearby hotel. The new names on the property records were Kevin, my half-brother, and his mother listed as a dependent co-owner. I called my father's former attorney, Mr. Harvey, the man who helped draft his will back in 2010. I remember because I typed the document myself when Dad's arthritis made it hard for him to write. I asked where the official will was and whether the file could be reopened. Mr. Harvey went quiet for a long time, then sighed. "Clara, I'm sorry to say your father withdrew his file last year when he asked to draft a new version, but it was never notarized, so the will has no legal standing." "Why didn't I know anything about this?" I asked. "Perhaps he never got the chance to tell you," he replied slowly. "And the last person to hold the key to the file cabinet wasn't you." I sank into the chair, my hand gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. Everything I had believed, that my father had made plans, that I would be protected, crumbled with frightening ease. That day, I looked at myself in the mirror, hair disheveled, eyes sunken, lips dry and cracked from sleepless nights. I didn't cry. The sadness inside me had frozen over long ago, leaving only numbness. My stepmother never said a word of thanks. Valerie sent me a message. "Thank you for staying calm. The family needs stability, not more drama." I read that phrase, "the family needs stability," over and over, as if it could somehow justify deception and theft. I nearly typed back, "What family? What am I in that definition?" But I deleted the words. I used to believe silence was a form of maturity, a way to keep the peace, a way to avoid causing more hurt after losing the man I loved most. But staying quiet for so long turned me into an outsider in my own life, a quiet shadow at the edge of the table, remembered only when someone needed help, never truly invited into the inner circle of family. I can't remember exactly when I began shrinking myself. Maybe it was during the family meeting after the funeral, when Valerie spoke with a lawyer's tone. "I think we should divide up the care duties for Mom. Clara, since you're single and more flexible, you'll take the medical responsibilities." No one asked if I agreed. Or maybe it was the Christmas Eve of 2015 when I called home and Valerie said, "Oh, everyone's gathering at Kevin's tonight. You don't need to drive back. It's cold out there." And I was standing at a gas station, holding a gift I'd wrapped weeks earlier, unsure which direction to go. I got used to no one remembering my birthday. Got used to no one checking on me when I broke my arm slipping on ice outside my house. Got used to the hollow praise. Claire is the strongest one in the family, which always carried the assumption that I'd pick myself up, handle everything, and be ready to rescue others from the messes they made. My father trusted me. I used to think that would be enough to keep me in the family picture, just a small corner of it. But I was wrong. They didn't push me out outright, they just slowly moved my chair farther and farther away, until I wasn't even in the room. And I, through all those years, pretended not to notice. I sat in front of my laptop for over an hour, fingers hovering above the keyboard, unable to type. Dozens of versions of a letter swirled through my mind, some angry, some cold, some pleading, some trying to justify, but none of them felt true to what I was really feeling. Eventually, I deleted everything, closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and started fresh. No frills, no shields. "To everyone," I typed, each word slow and deliberate. "I'm not the one dividing this family. I'm the one refusing to keep being punished. I won't be the life raft anymore in a family that only remembers me when the water's rising." I paused, eyes on the words on the screen, then continued. I laid out what I'd done. From the financial help I never got back to the silence I kept every time I was humiliated in front of others. I didn't write with bitterness. I simply listed, clearly, factually, without argument. I attached 3 files to the email, a record of all my personal transfers to Kevin and Janice over 8 years, screenshots of conversations showing threats, blame, and manipulation, and a financial misconduct report involving Kevin's company, which I had submitted to the IRS 3 weeks earlier. In the final line I wrote, "I will not erase what I know. If cornered, I will bring everything to light, publicly. This is not a threat, this is a boundary, and I'm drawing it now." I reread the email 3 times. No shaking hands, no hesitation. Then I clicked send. Not 10 minutes later, my phone started buzzing, non-stop. The first message was from Kevin, just one line. "You're destroying everything. If Mom has a heart attack, it's your fault." I stared at it, not angry, not surprised, just tired in a way that felt older than my body. I set the phone down, walked to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of cold water. When I came back, I replied to Kevin with words sharp enough to pierce the veil of his excuses. "I didn't kill anyone. I just laid the truth on the table. If Mom falls, look at who made her stand on shaky ground." I didn't wait for a reply. I knew he wouldn't confront things directly. Kevin never did. That was always my job. A little later, Valerie sent a string of texts, so fake they bordered on comedic. "Clara, can't we talk this out like adults? Things are getting out of hand. Family is about forgiveness." I didn't respond, just took a screenshot and saved it under the folder Valerie Developments. Then came a message from my stepmother. "Clara, if you ever cared about me, you wouldn't do this. I'm not well. I can't sleep." I closed the laptop. I didn't want to read anymore. The porch light from the neighbor's apartment blinked faintly through the curtain. Snow kept falling, steadily, as if the world didn't care one bit about missed calls, guilt-tripping texts, or veiled threats. A part of me mourned that indifference. Another part felt relieved by it. I returned to my desk, pulled out the brown leather journal, flipped to the nearly last blank page. I wrote, "They don't want to apologize. They just want me to feel guilty for finally speaking up." I underlined it. A firm, unwavering line. Around midnight, I received an email from an unfamiliar address, likely one of Kevin's attorneys. The message was short, a demand to retract everything I'd sent, threatening countersuit if I continued to distribute false information. I forwarded it to my lawyer, attaching the relevant evidence. I wasn't afraid of them using the law as a whip anymore. I was ready. I had documentation, I had a voice, and I would not back down in silence. I don't know what they're planning next. Maybe a fake victim campaign on social media, maybe late-night calls pretending to be concerned about my health, or maybe they'll stay silent, not out of remorse, but because they're calculating their next move. Whatever they choose, I've stepped out of the role I used to play. I'm no longer the one holding up the wobbly chairs they built, no longer the person carrying everyone else's mistakes, just to be called the good daughter, the understanding sister. I was making tea in the kitchen when I heard a soft knock, like wind tapping against the glass. I stepped out, pulled the curtain to the side, and saw Abby standing there, shoulders drawn tight inside a thick coat, eyes red and swollen. Next to her was a faded backpack with one strap nearly torn, like it had just been through some kind of escape. I opened the door. No one said anything for a few seconds. "My mom doesn't know I'm here," Abby said, her voice trembling like cold air slipping through a crack. I nodded. "Come in, it's freezing out." We sat across from each other at the small table by the window. I poured hot chocolate into 2 ceramic mugs. Abby wrapped her hands around hers like she was holding on to something warmer than the drink itself. "Everyone in the family always said you were strange," she said after a long pause. "But I never saw you do anything wrong. You just didn't pretend like they did." I stayed silent, waiting for her to continue. There were no questions that needed answers right then. She just needed to know she was being heard. "My mom," Abby hesitated. "She yells at my dad every time they shut the bedroom door. I used to think it was just regular fighting, but then I started hearing words like, 'Keep it quiet. If this gets out, we're done,' and 'Deal with that girl before she spills anything.'" Her voice trailed off. I looked at her, and in her eyes, I saw something I once hoped someone would see in me. A fear of not being believed. 16 years old, sharper than her thin frame suggested, facing the thick layers of lies inside her own home. "Have you told anyone?" I asked gently. Abby shook her head. "Everyone says my mom is amazing. Who would believe me? And if my dad doesn't say anything, what am I supposed to say to anyone else?" I stared at the window pane where the lake was covered in solid white. On the shore, a few dried reeds swayed in the wind. Neither of us spoke for a long time. She didn't need promises, just not to be treated like she was imagining things. "I took screenshots of some emails," Abby said, pulling out a small blue USB drive from her backpack. "I don't know if it's worth anything, but I know I can't keep it to myself anymore." I took it without saying thank you. She didn't need to hear that. I looked her in the eye. "Are you safe?" She nodded, barely. "I don't want to go back home tonight." I nodded back. "Then stay here. The last room down the hall has a bed if you want to call your dad. The landline's there." "I already called," Abby said, her eyes glistening. "He didn't answer." I didn't ask further. A man who stays silent when his daughter calls in fear probably won't explain anything to anyone. Abby took a sip of hot chocolate, lips tight like she was holding back tears. I turned to look at the USB, then set it down on the table between us. "You know this could break your family apart," I asked, not to scare her, but to make sure she was ready for what might come. Abby didn't hesitate. "I think my family already broke a long time ago. People just pretend it's still together." I nodded and refilled our mugs. The steam curled gently over the rim, a quiet border between what had been and what was coming. I didn't say I'd help. Didn't say what I'd do with what she brought. But something stirred inside me. Not because of the files, but because of the look in her eyes. It had been so long since anyone looked at me like a person, not a walking credit card, not a punching bag for their stress, but someone real, someone who listens, who feels, who's worth more than solving everyone's mess. When Abby excused herself to wash up, I stayed seated, staring at the USB. I made no promises. But part of me had already stepped into another battle, not out of revenge, but because I couldn't turn away from someone who had also been pushed out of their own story. And maybe I wouldn't be alone. That morning, as I was pouring coffee, my phone buzzed. A notification from an old college acquaintance, along with a link to a Facebook post. I opened it. My finger froze when I read the first line. Clara's not doing well. After losing her father, she's been paranoid. Thinks everyone's out to get her. Maybe she needs help but is too afraid to ask. Below were dozens of shares and comments dripping with concern. People wrote in that condescending tone of false kindness. I hope she finds peace, or grief is hard. She probably needs therapy. No one asked what really happened. No one questioned the story. They only read one side, Valerie's, and acted like I was some woman falling apart quietly, needing to be gently saved. I set my phone down on the granite countertop, cool under my palm. There was no anger, just one quiet question in my head. Do they really think I'm that weak? I called Helen, an old friend from law school who once helped me get out of an unfair lease in college. Her voice was as sharp and steady as ever. After I finished speaking, Helen paused for a moment, then said calmly, I'll draft a cease and desist for defamation today. We'll send it directly to Valerie's house and her workplace. If she keeps going, we escalate. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'm not trying to win, I said. I just want her to understand I won't stay silent anymore. That afternoon, Valerie received a carefully sealed ivory envelope. Inside was a formal warning for reputational harm, citing laws on defamation, misinformation, and legal consequences. Helen told me the delivery guy said Valerie's hand shook when she signed for it. 3 days later, another rumor vanished. The ones who had once shared her post quietly deleted their traces. No one apologized, no one corrected anything. But I didn't need them to. What I wanted was silence. Not to hide, but to finally speak from a place where no one could talk over me. A week later, I got a call from the bank's fraud department. They confirmed suspicious activities in Kevin's business account and notified me that a federal order was issued to freeze it. I didn't ask who filed the report. I didn't need to know. But I knew that somewhere in a boardroom, Kevin was trying to explain things to a lawyer while no one in the family could cover for him anymore. I didn't post anything online, didn't write dramatic exposés, but the same people who once clapped when Valerie cut me out of the family now looked at me differently. No more pitying shrugs, no more whispered judgment, only silence, and within that silence, something close to fear. One afternoon, I was arranging flowers in the living room when the mail carrier knocked on the door. A hand-delivered envelope, no return address, no logo. The handwriting across the front slanted slightly, but I recognized it instantly. It was Janice's. I opened the letter, my hands steady. Just one page, black ink, each word carefully written. Clara, you're doing something unforgivable. I don't understand why you've chosen to betray us all like this. You're destroying this family. If your father were alive, he'd be heartbroken. Stop while you still can. I read it slowly, not skipping a single line, each word written as if trying to strangle me with a fabricated sense of family morality. But this time it couldn't. I folded the letter, didn't tear it, didn't crumple it. I walked into the kitchen, opened the fireplace that hadn't seen a flame since morning, placed the letter on the iron grate, struck a match and watched as the fire curled around the edges of the paper, devouring it until it crumbled into delicate ash. I just stood there, arms crossed, eyes on the flickering flame, as if saying goodbye to one last accusation from someone who never truly saw me as her daughter. Not even once. The light outside had softened, the lake in the distance had turned a leaden silver. In the quiet of the room, I could hear the wall clock ticking steadily, like a gentle reminder that the time for silence had passed. And I, finally, had stepped beyond it. I left Minneapolis on a rainy Tuesday morning. The moving truck had gone ahead, and I drove my old sedan, the one my father once gave me, carrying a few boxes of books, a few small items no one else would care about but me, and an aging digital piano that had been my companion on too many sleepless nights. The map led me north, past winter-stripped fields and winding roads strewn with fallen leaves. When the faded wooden sign that read Bemidji appeared around a bend, I rolled down the window and took a deep breath. The air smelled of pine and sliced through my ribs like ice, but it felt clean, like a fever breaking. The cabin I rented stood at the end of a small road by the lake, sloped roof, arched windows, porch dusted with a soft layer of snow. Each step I took on the wooden floor echoed firm beneath my feet, grounding me in a place that required no explanations, only I didn't buy curtains. Light from the lake reflected onto the walls, soft and still like a peaceful touch. During those first nights, I didn't sleep much, not because of nightmares, but because my body was relearning how to breathe without waiting for someone to knock, without expecting a message, without anticipating another demand from a place called home that never really was one. A week after I moved in, I received a letter from Abby, a handwritten note on pale yellow paper, each word neat and deliberate. In it, she told me she had turned the USB over to the police, along with a full statement. No one pressured her, no one saw it coming. She simply walked into the station after school, backpack in hand, and said, "I'm not afraid of them anymore." I read the letter under my desk lamp, heart torn but relieved. I didn't know what lay ahead for Abby, but I knew she wouldn't be walking alone through that thick darkness anymore. News about Valerie surfaced a week later on a regional financial news site. An internal investigation was underway for misuse of funds, leaking client data, and accusations of using corporate assets to cover vague family expenses. Kevin was named in a broader audit. I didn't follow the details. I didn't need to. I simply held on to the quiet knowledge that the door they once used to lock me away had been flung wide open. And now, they were the ones standing exposed in the light. I placed a sheet of paper on the writing desk by the window, opened my journal, and wrote one line. "I'm not seeking revenge. I just stopped paying the price for things I didn't cause." I wasn't trying to cast myself as a victim, nor claim to be some hero. I was simply a woman who had spent too long in a kitchen with no seat for herself, who had poured too much time, money, and warmth into a place where love always came with conditions. And when I left, no one said goodbye. But what mattered was that I walked away. By late afternoon, the lake was nearly frozen. I brewed peppermint tea, wrapped a scarf around my neck, and opened the window to let the cold air drift in gently. Inside me, there were no more quiet waves crashing against the shore, just still water and a sky full of pale gray clouds. Not beautiful in any grand way, but honest, like the peace I once thought I'd never find. I received a package sent to my new address. It was from the attorney's office, a copy of the subpoena for Kevin, along with legal confirmation that I no longer had any ties to the estate my father left behind. I signed without hesitation. No one could show up now and say, "You should be more understanding." No more late-night phone calls starting with, "Only you can help." All of that was behind me, like smoke thinning in the wind, leaving space for the one thing I still held firm. My own choice. I live simply. Morning walks by the lake, quiet afternoons with a book, evenings filled with classical music or the sound of wind brushing against the roof. Each passing day, the questions that used to stick in my mind began to fade. Where did I go wrong? Should I have done something differently? Now, there's no room left for what if. Only the truth remains. I stopped before I completely disappeared. That afternoon, the last light stretched sideways through the pine trees by the lake, casting long golden streaks on the snow that hadn't yet melted. I sat on the wooden chair on the porch, wrapped in my old scarf, holding a steaming cup of herbal tea. The air smelled of pine wood and damp earth, gentle, like a hand resting on my shoulder, saying nothing, only reminding me that I had found a quiet place to be. Beside me was a sealed envelope Abby had sent by mail. A soft dandelion print in the corner, her handwriting slightly tilted, like it was written with a hand still trembling. I opened it. Inside was a colored pencil drawing, all lines but clear. It showed a small wooden cabin, wide porch, shimmering lake behind it like glass. In front of the door were two figures, one tall, one small, sitting side by side, holding steaming mugs, surrounded by snow. At the bottom, Abby had written a single line in blue ink. "You are family, if you want to be." I traced my finger over each line of the drawing. My heart didn't swell with overwhelming emotion. It moved like the lake on a gentle breeze, just enough to ripple, just enough to know something deep inside me had shifted. I had spent so many years trying to squeeze myself into spaces never meant for me, standing at the edge of dinner tables, forcing a smile when ignored, trying to help just to be acknowledged. Every rejection, every time I was treated like I didn't exist, I tucked away into some quiet corner inside myself, thinking that if I stayed silent long enough, if I tried a little harder, they would open the door. But I came to understand some doors don't stay closed because you haven't knocked long enough. They're closed because the lock was changed long ago and no one ever told you. I used to think walking away meant failure, but now I know stepping back doesn't mean giving up. It means you no longer have to beg. It means you don't have to trade away every part of yourself just to linger on the outskirts of something called blood ties. A person's worth isn't measured by how much pain they can tolerate, nor by how many times they can forgive without limit. It's in knowing when to stop before they're pulled under for good. I no longer feel anger toward those who turned away. They live how they were taught. They love the only way they know how. And sometimes that means hurting people and pretending that hurt never happened. But I don't need them to undo it anymore. I just need myself, whole and unbroken. I placed Abby's drawing on the wooden table and pressed it under a book to keep it safe from the wind. My hand curled around the rim of my teacup, feeling the warmth spread through the thin ceramic. The last light of sunset slanted through the back of the cabin, painting the porch in golden tones. I sat still, no plans, no calculations, just letting my body breathe without having to brace for anything. I used to wonder if I'd be lonely walking away from it all, but it turns out true loneliness is sitting in a crowded house where no one sees you. And right now, even with only the wind and bird song weaving through the trees, I feel present in my own life. I don't need applause to prove I made the right choice. I don't need anyone to say I was the one who suffered more. The only thing I needed, the truth, has been laid bare, and the only thing I choose to keep, peace, can no longer be taken from me. Have you ever been in my shoes? Sitting among people called family, yet constantly stretching yourself thin, just to be noticed, just to be useful, while no one asks if you have anything left to give? If you've ever felt that way, I hope you'll leave a comment. I truly want to hear your thoughts after listening to this story, not just because it's mine, but because somewhere in these moments there might be a reflection of your own. What do you think makes a real family? Is it shared blood? Or is it kindness, understanding, and mutual respect day after day? Leave your thoughts below. Don't hesitate to speak up, because your voice might be exactly what someone else out there needs to hear. And if you'd like to keep following real stories about love, loss, healing, and what it means to come home to yourself, subscribe to this channel. There are so many stories about family life still waiting to be told. Not perfect, not polished, but honest and worth listening to.